Bill Maher mocked Karoline Leavitt for being too young to understand politics, so she calmly pulled out his own quotes and left him stunned on live television. It was a Friday night in Los Angeles. The studio lights were sharp, the applause sign was blinking, and the energy backstage had that usual mix of caffeine and nerves. Bill Maher leaned back in his chair during the final makeup touch-up, scanning over his cue cards with that familiar smirk on his face. He knew who was coming on, and he was ready to play the crowd. Karoline Leavitt, 27, Trump White House staffer turned political firecracker, sat quietly in the green room, legs crossed, phone in her lap. She wasn't scrolling. She was reading. Names, dates, statements, everything Maher had said about youth and experience over the past decade. She'd heard the rumors. He wasn't a fan of her politics or her age, but that didn't matter now. She knew what she came for. The producer popped his head in. "You're up in 5. She stood up, adjusted her navy blazer, and walked to the stage like she was headed to a meeting, not a battleground. The applause roared as she stepped onto the stage. Maher gave her a casual wave. "Well, you're braver than most," he said before she even sat down. She gave him a tight smile. "I've been called worse." The audience laughed, light but a little uneasy. They knew how this went. Maher liked to poke. His guests either played along or got chewed up. And Karoline didn't strike them as someone who played. "Karoline Leavitt," Maher began, leaning in with his trademark mock-serious tone. "Youngest GOP communications director in history, still somehow in her 20s, and, let me check my notes, already certain how the world works. Impressive." She leaned forward. "Well, I haven't seen it all, Bill, but I've seen enough to recognize when people talk down to others because they feel threatened." A few surprised claps from the crowd. Maher chuckled. "Oh, I'm not threatened," he said. "Just trying to figure out if you actually believe what you say or if you're just auditioning for a Fox News slot." There it was, the first jab. He grinned like he'd served up something clever. Karoline didn't flinch. "Is that what you think political women are doing now? Auditioning?" That one landed. The energy shifted slightly, but Maher pivoted. "Look, I'm all for young people getting involved. I am. But the problem is when they talk like they've got it all figured out before they've paid any dues." She tilted her head. "Dues like yours, Bill? Smoking weed on HBO and calling that political commentary?" Now that got a real reaction. A few cheers, a few laughs. Someone in the front row even gasped. Maher looked over at the producer with a mock accusatory glare, as if to say, "You brought her here." Still, he was the host. He had the upper hand, or so it seemed. He turned to face the audience. "This is going to be fun." And to the viewers watching at home, it was already starting to feel like more than just another episode. It wasn't about left or right. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about two people who believed they were smarter than the other, and only one would walk off that stage looking sharper. But what neither of them knew yet was that this wasn't going to end like the usual segments. Someone was about to get caught off guard, and it wasn't Karoline. Bill leaned forward, elbows on the desk, ready to pounce. He was in his element, where sarcasm met confidence, where audience laughter validated the punchlines. But Karoline didn't shrink back. She adjusted the microphone on her lapel and waited. "So," Maher began, "you've said repeatedly that the mainstream media is not just biased, but actively working against conservatives. Isn't that just the go-to excuse when your side doesn't like how something's covered?" Karoline didn't blink. "Bill, if it were just about not liking coverage, maybe I wouldn't care. But it's about patterns. It's about how stories are framed, who gets airtime, who gets fact-checked, and who gets a free pass." Maher raised an eyebrow. "Free pass? Like who, Trump?" She smiled. "No, like when a sitting president forgets what state he's in 3 times in 1 week, and it barely makes a headline. But if a Republican mispronounces a word, it's front-page news. You don't see a difference?" Some of the crowd clapped, others groaned. Maher smirked, sensing the division. "Oh, come on," he said. "You're telling me conservatives don't get caught in their own lies?" "Everyone lies, Bill," she said calmly, "but the press decides whose lies matter." That line hung in the air for a second. The studio was quieter now. Maher tried to pivot. Look, maybe there's a lean, sure, but biased media didn't create January 6th. Biased media didn't storm the Capitol. Caroline leaned in slightly, tone sharper. And biased media didn't cover the summer riots of 2020 with the same outrage. You call it protest. Others call it destruction. But that's exactly the point. Narrative depends on who's telling the story. Bill took a sip of water. He wasn't rattled, not yet, but she wasn't playing into his usual rhythm either. Most guests either laughed nervously or tried to be liked. She wasn't doing either. She was throwing it back, calm, pointed, and unapologetic. He looked at her with curiosity. You ever wonder if you're just too young to see the full picture yet? There it was. The tone shifted. Not a joke now, more like a tie with a grin. Caroline didn't answer right away. She crossed one leg over the other, rested her hands, and just stared at him for a beat. The audience started murmuring, sensing something was coming. Too young? She repeated, voice low. You think that's the issue? I think perspective comes with time, he said. That's not an insult. It's just wisdom is earned. She nodded slowly. So you're saying I should wait until I've aged out of relevance to have something to say? He laughed, more reflex than amusement. That's not fair, he replied. But it's what you meant, she said. You didn't challenge what I said. You challenged whether I was allowed to say it. That line made the audience shift in their seats. Some murmured. One person even said, not loudly, but clearly, she's got a point. Maher's grin faltered just slightly. He reached for another card on the desk, but didn't read it. I've interviewed politicians twice your age who still don't get it, he said. And I've seen people your age rewrite what they said 5 years ago and pretend it never happened, she replied. That's when he looked up. What's that supposed to mean? But Caroline wasn't about to hand it over yet, not until she was ready. The moment hadn't peaked, but it was rising, and what she was holding in reserve was going to change the tone of the entire night. Caroline smoothed her blazer and leaned back in her chair, relaxed but sharp. The pause after her last line had worked. Bill wasn't laughing now. He was scanning her face, looking for a hint of hesitation. There wasn't any. What did you mean by that? He asked again, trying to keep his tone even. She smiled just slightly. I mean that you've made a career out of calling people hypocrites while pretending not to be one yourself. The crowd made a collective sound, somewhere between laughter and an oof. Bill chuckled dryly, raising an eyebrow. Wow, that's a big swing for someone who hasn't been alive long enough to remember Bush's first term. She didn't flinch. I didn't need to be alive to read your transcript from October 2012. You were defending Obama's drone policy, calling it the hard choices of leadership. And yet, just 3 years later, you slammed a Republican for saying the same thing about the Pentagon. I looked it up. Bill blinked. She was ready for this. You keep saying people should evolve. Fine, but you never say when you did, or why. You just act like you were always on the smarter side. He gave a small shrug, trying to keep it light. People grow. I'm allowed to shift my views. Then stop mocking others for doing the same, she said. That line was quiet, firm, not theatrical, but honest. And that's what hit. The room had gone still. Even the band in the back seemed unsure whether to play the usual musical cue that carried segments into jokes. Maher tapped his card on the desk without looking at it. The studio didn't feel like a comedy show anymore. It felt like a courtroom where someone had just brought evidence. Bill cleared his throat. Okay, you've done your homework. I'll give you that. But that's not the issue, she said quickly. Homework doesn't win arguments. Clarity does. And the reason I came here tonight wasn't to throw punches. It was to show that people like me, people you write off as too young, are actually paying attention. Her voice wasn't raised. She wasn't defensive. That's what made it land so hard. Maher tried to regain the rhythm. All right, but paying attention doesn't always equal understanding. And when I say you're young, I don't mean you're wrong. I mean maybe you haven't felt the weight yet. You know, the kind of weight that comes after making mistakes in public and living through the fallout. Caroline nodded slowly. You think I haven't made mistakes? No, I think you haven't paid the price for them yet. She held his gaze. Or maybe I'm still paying, but not in the ways that show up on headlines. That silenced him for a second. He blinked, then said, fair. Some applause broke out in the back rows, not huge, but real. She shifted her tone. Bill, I didn't come here to fight you. I came here because I think your audience deserves to hear from someone who doesn't fit the stereotype you keep pushing. You call yourself a free thinker, but you spend most of your show putting people in boxes. I don't care if people disagree with me. I care when they're not allowed to even listen. He exhaled. You're good. She half smiled. I didn't come here to be good. I came here to be honest. The studio wasn't sure how to react. The usual formula, host outsmarts guest, audience laughs, cue applause, was breaking apart. And Maher, for all his wit, wasn't sure if he was losing control of the room or finally being confronted in it. But Karoline wasn't finished yet. What she said next would hit even harder. Because it wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about who gets to speak, who gets dismissed, and why that's about more than age. Bill Maher sat back, now visibly more cautious. He tapped his pen on the desk twice, something he did when he was buying time. Karoline didn't fill the silence. She let it sit, confident in the space she'd just claimed. All right, Maher said, forcing a chuckle. You've done your prep, I'll give you that. But the real world's not Twitter threads and sound bites. It's compromise, nuance, and long nights in rooms with people who hate you. You learn that after you've been burned a few times. Karoline tilted her head. You think I haven't? He raised an eyebrow, almost condescending again. You're in your 20s. I think you've been criticized. That's different. She let that hang. Then in the calmest tone yet, she said, Boy, you know what I read last night, Bill? A transcript from your 2005 interview with Larry King. You said, quote, I'm not here to be fair. I'm here to be interesting. He smiled faintly. I probably did. And then in 2017, she continued, you told Vanity Fair, if you're under 30, your opinion doesn't count yet because you haven't lived. A couple of low groans from the audience. Not everyone liked where this was going. But the kicker, she added, in 2019, you spent 10 minutes mocking a teenage climate activist, calling her overly emotional and uninformed, before admitting you hadn't actually read any of her work. The studio was dead silent now. Even the camera crew had stopped moving. I came here tonight knowing that you'd probably try to make an example of me, she said. But what you didn't expect is that I've been listening to you for years, watching how you speak about women, how you dismiss younger voices, how you build your arguments on clever insults instead of substance. Maher's smile disappeared. Let's talk about experience, she said, her voice still even. Experience isn't about the number of birthdays you've celebrated. It's about what you carry. My dad worked 18-hour days hauling freight in Manchester, New Hampshire, just to keep the lights on. I helped my mom run a kitchen on weekends when I was 12. I paid my way through college while working 2 jobs and started in politics while still attending lectures at St. Anselm. But you're right, I'm young. And somehow I'm still here, sitting across from you. The audience clapped, stronger now. Not a full standing ovation, but definitely not polite either. People were leaning forward, listening. The laughter was gone. It had turned into something else. Maher's face tightened. He'd lost the upper hand, and he knew it. There was no punchline he could throw that wouldn't make him look small. Well, he said, exhaling deeply. That's quite a story. Karoline nodded. It's mine. I don't expect you to like it. I just expect you to let me tell it without interruption. More claps, a few cheers this time. He tried to recover. Look, I don't hate young people. I just think some of you are rushing into the conversation without realizing the consequences of what you say. And some of you, she countered, have been talking so long that you forgot what it's like to actually listen. That one hit harder than anything else. It wasn't just the delivery. It was the timing, the tone, the restraint. No shouting, no theatrics, just words, sharp, direct, and impossible to ignore. The camera panned across the audience. Some looked stunned. Others were smiling. One older woman in the third row was mouthing, wow. Even Maher leaned back, finally quiet. Okay, he said, nodding. That was a good one. But what came next wasn't applause or laughter. It was a long, loaded silence. Because something in the room had changed. For the first time, Maher wasn't the one in control. Bill Maher took a breath, but it didn't come easy. The kind of breath people take when they realize they're not steering the conversation anymore. Karoline had landed the hit, and not with volume or drama, but with preparation, clarity, and grit. The crowd wasn't roaring, they were watching, listening, hanging on whatever came next. "I gotta admit," Maher said, voice a touch lower now, "you've surprised me." She didn't gloat, no smirk, no victory lap, just a small nod, like she expected nothing less. "Most people come on here," he continued. "They're either too defensive or too eager to impress. You're not doing either." Karoline shrugged slightly. "Maybe that's because I'm not here to impress you." A few chuckles rippled through the studio. They weren't laughing at her. They were laughing because it was true. Bill leaned forward again, as if testing her one last time. "You think that moment we just had, do you think it changes anything? Really? Or do you think it's just content for people who already agree with you?" That's where her voice dropped, softer than before. "I think most people don't need to be told what to think. They just need to feel like someone's actually saying what they're afraid to say themselves." Silence again. "I'm not here to change the world in 20 minutes, she added. "But if someone watching this is thinking, I'm too young, or I'm too dismissed, or I don't belong in that room, then yeah, maybe it changes something." That was the line that hit home. Not just with the audience in the studio, but the viewers glued to their TVs and live streams. Comments began flooding in online. Clips were already being clipped. Screenshots, quotes, reactions. Some called it the takedown of the year. Others claimed she was just another talking head. But the noise didn't matter, not to her. Not right now. Maher scratched the back of his head. "All right, I'll say this. You've got guts." She smiled politely. "Guts are cheap. Doing your homework? That takes effort." The crowd loved that. Laughter, clapping, even a whistle or two. Somewhere off stage, a producer leaned over to his assistant and whispered, "This is gonna trend." And it did. Within 10 minutes, the hashtag #LeaveItVs Maher was climbing across platforms. On X, on YouTube, even on Reddit, where political debates usually turned ugly fast, people were posting time-stamped breakdowns of the exchange. She came with receipts. She didn't raise her voice once. He didn't know what hit him. This is what happens when you underestimate someone. But Karoline didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She could feel it in the room. Bill gave a half smile, one part impressed, one part bruised ego. "Well, if nothing else, you've made my job harder tonight." She stood as the segment began to wrap. "That's what I'm here for." The credits rolled, the music swelled, the live feed ended, but the electricity didn't fade. Backstage, she walked past a tech guy who gave her a quick thumbs up. Another assistant mouthed, "Well done." She didn't stop for selfies. She didn't celebrate. She went straight to her dressing room, closed the door, and finally exhaled. Maher remained at his desk a moment longer than usual, staring at the empty seat across from him. He didn't say anything, just shook his head once, almost like he'd been outplayed in a game he thought he couldn't lose. But the conversation wasn't over. Not for the audience, not for the press, and definitely not for Karoline. What came next would happen outside that studio, and it would prove just how deep that moment really cut. By sunrise the next morning, the clip had already cleared 3 million views. It was everywhere. Morning radio shows in Boise, late-night recaps in San Diego, college forums, Facebook feeds, TikTok edits, each with its own spin, each plucking a different sentence to crown as the moment. Some cut straight to her final line. Others played the build-up like a prize fight. In Tallahassee, a retired school teacher named Nora Sims posted the video with the caption, "I may not agree with her politics, but that girl held her ground better than most men I've seen on that show." It had over 12,000 likes in 2 hours. Across the country in Flagstaff, a first-year student at Northern Arizona University named Evan reposted a snippet with the tag #respect and wrote, She didn't even raise her voice. She just wrecked him with facts. Meanwhile, on cable news, the coverage was exactly what you'd expect, split down the line. One network hailed it as a generational shift in conservative media presence, while another framed it as a calculated PR stunt from a rising right-wing influencer. Karoline watched none of it. She'd flown back to New Hampshire late that night, her phone still buzzing as the plane touched down. The cab ride to her apartment was quiet. The driver, an older man with a Boston accent, glanced in the rearview mirror once. "You that girl from TV?" She didn't answer right away. "Yeah," she said finally. He chuckled. "You had the stones to say what half the country's thinking. I don't care what side you're on, that took guts." She nodded. "Thanks." He didn't charge her for the ride. Upstairs, she dropped her bags and went straight to her laptop. Not to track views, not to check mentions. She opened a document she'd started 3 weeks earlier. It was titled "Earn It Every Day." A speech she'd been building quietly, something personal, something outside the spin rooms and talk shows. She scrolled past the first few pages, eyes tired but sharp. Then she added a line. "Don't let them decide what you know based on how long you've been alive." Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from someone on her comms team. "Hey, check your mentions. Your name's trending with Mars. It's not just clips. People are actually debating you now." She didn't respond right away. She scrolled. One tweet stood out, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. It came from a former speechwriter in Des Moines. "I've worked for senators who've frozen up under less pressure. That girl didn't flinch. I may not agree with her, but I respect the way she held her own. We need more of that on both sides." That's when Karoline finally posted. Just one tweet. "Preparation beats performance. Every time." It got retweeted over 20,000 times in under an hour. She didn't post anything else that day. But behind the scenes, conversations had already begun. Producers were calling her manager. Editors wanted interviews. Podcasts wanted her as a guest. Some were trying to spin the moment as a cultural shift. Others were angling for conflict. Would she go head-to-head with another late-night host? Was she open to debates? She declined most of them. It wasn't about victory. She knew the second she made it about winning, she'd lose the people who saw something different in that moment, something deeper. It wasn't the clash that made people pay attention. It was the control, the way she spoke with calm precision, the way she didn't backpedal, didn't scream, didn't crack a smile even when she could have. And somewhere, even Bill Maher had to respect it. Later that week, on his podcast, he addressed it. "I've had a lot of guests over the years, some great, some boring, some I can't even remember. But Karoline, she came to play. I underestimated her. That's on me." But there was one more chapter to this story, one that wouldn't unfold in front of cameras or trending hashtags, but in a much quieter moment. One that would remind Karoline why she spoke up in the first place. A week had passed. The buzz was dying down, but not entirely. The internet had already moved on to the next viral moment. Someone else's comment, someone else's drama. But in a small town just outside Manchester, New Hampshire, Karoline was finally back to her routine. It was a chilly Sunday morning. No cameras, no ring lights, just her and a cup of coffee in her parents' kitchen. Her mom was folding dish towels, humming something under her breath, while her dad was reading a sports column from a folded-up local paper. "You look tired," her mom said. Karoline gave a half smile. "That's because I am." Her dad looked up. "You made us proud." She didn't say anything right away, just nodded, staring down into her coffee mug. "I didn't plan on it going like that," she said finally. "I didn't think he'd go there with the age thing." Her dad set down the paper. "Doesn't matter what he said. You stayed sharp. You stayed calm. That's what people remember." Her mom added, "And you didn't lower yourself to anyone else's tone." Karoline leaned back in her chair, quiet for a long moment. "I keep thinking about the look on his face after I said it. Not because I wanted to win, but because I think for once he actually listened." Her dad nodded. "That's rare. People like him, they talk for a living. Listening takes effort." She glanced toward the window, eyes still a little tired. "I used to think I had to out-talk people like him. Be louder, prove something. But I think the real power comes from showing you've done your homework, that you respect the stage, even if others don't expect you to own it. Her mother smiled, and maybe showing a little class when others wouldn't. That afternoon, she went for a walk around the neighborhood where she grew up. Same cracked sidewalks, same rusted mailbox, same quiet hum of a town that didn't care who was trending online. A few neighbors waved, but no one stopped her for a photo. No questions, no interviews, just peace. She needed that, because the moment she went viral wasn't the victory, it was the preparation behind it. The hours alone, studying clips, reading everything Maher had ever written, watching him dismantle people with sarcasm, and thinking, if he tries that with me, I'll be ready. And she had been. But she also knew that one moment wouldn't define her. If she got caught up chasing the next mic drop, she'd lose the reason she started speaking in the first place. Later that night, she sat down at her desk and opened the same speech draft again. This time, she finished it. The closing line read, "You don't earn respect by shouting the loudest. You earn it by showing up ready, speaking clearly, and refusing to fold when the pressure rises." She hit save. And that was it. She didn't need applause or more hashtags. What she needed and what she had was clarity. A reminder that showing up prepared means something. That holding your ground with grace can matter more than winning a fight. And that age, gender, and background don't determine your place in the room. How you carry yourself does. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt underestimated by a teacher, a boss, a parent, a crowd, you don't need permission to speak. You need preparation. You need calm. You need truth. And once you have those things, you don't need to yell. You just need to say it once and say it well. If this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. We've got more real stories, more real moments, and more voices that deserve to be heard.